The first thing I noticed was not her handwriting on the sticky note, or the half-eaten granola bar beside her laptop. It was my name on her phone screen. Except it wasn't just my name, it said emergency contact, and also maybe more than that. I stood there in the middle of her apartment, holding her phone like I'd forgotten what hands were for. 2 minutes before that, everything had been completely ordinary. It was a Saturday afternoon in late October, the kind where the light comes in flat and gold through west-facing windows, and the whole city feels like it's exhaling after a week of rain. Ren had asked me to grab her phone off the kitchen counter, while she was untangling a mess of fairy lights she'd pulled out of a storage bin. We were supposed to hang them on her balcony railing before it got dark, which was happening earlier every day now because this was Vancouver. And October didn't ask permission. "I don't need directions," she'd said, pulling a knot loose with her teeth. I didn't say anything about directions. "You're already measuring the railing with your eyes, I can tell." "I'm not measuring anything. You have your measuring face on." "I don't have a measuring face." "You absolutely have a measuring face. It's the one you make before you tell someone they hung a picture slightly crooked." I'd let that one go because she wasn't wrong. That was Ren. That had been Ren for almost 4 years. We met at a mutual friend's housewarming in East Van when she handed me a cup of something warm and told me I looked like I was trying to figure out the fastest exit route. I told her I was. She said she'd already found it and pointed to the side door behind the bookshelf, then asked if I wanted to go stand on the fire escape instead. We stood out there for an hour talking about everything and nothing. By the time we went back inside, the party had thinned out and I had her number saved in my phone. After that, we just kept showing up for each other. She was the person I texted when my landlord ignored my maintenance requests for 3 weeks, and I needed someone to talk me down from sending an email I'd regret. She was the person I called when I got passed over for a promotion I'd been working toward for 8 months, and didn't want to explain the full context to anyone who hadn't been hearing about it in real time. I was the person she called when her car got towed on Granville, and she needed a ride at 11 on a Tuesday night. I was the person she texted in all caps when she found a great deal on a vintage lamp and needed someone to validate the decision immediately. We had each other's door codes. I knew she kept oat milk in the fridge even though she claimed she wasn't that kind of person. She knew I had a specific mug I preferred for coffee and that if she used it and washed it, she had to put it back on the left side of the cabinet, not the right. Small things. The kind of things you only learn by actually showing up. Everyone around us had made comments at some point. Her coworker Jamie asked once, in front of me, whether we were dating. Ren had laughed and said no, obviously. I had agreed. Easily. Too easily maybe, which is a thing I only understand now looking back at it. Her phone had buzzed while she was still fighting with the lights. "My hands are covered," she said, not looking up. "Can you just check who that is?" I didn't think anything of it. This was normal. I read her texts when she was driving. She checked my phone when I was cooking. We knew each other's passcodes because at some point it had just become impractical not to, so I picked it up. The screen lit up, and there was a notification from me. I'd sent her a photo 20 minutes earlier of the coffee shop across the street from my apartment, which had put up its Christmas decorations already in October, while it was still technically autumn. I'd captioned it, "Crime Scene," but I barely registered the photo, because above my message where my contact name should have been, it said something else, "Emergency Contact," and also maybe more than that. I read it twice. Then a third time. The fairy lights rustled behind me. Ren was still talking. "If that's my mom, just tell me a number between 1 and 10 and that's how many minutes before I call her back." I didn't answer. She stopped. The rustle stopped. "What?" she asked. I looked up. She turned around. One string of lights still wrapped around her wrist like a bracelet that hadn't decided what it wanted to be yet. She saw my face first, before she saw the phone. And I watched something shift in her expression. A recognition. Then something that looked a lot like panic, wearing a calm expression on top of it. She crossed the room in about 4 steps and took the phone from my hand. Locked the screen. Set it face down on the counter. Then stood there with her hand flat on top of it, like she was trying to keep something from escape. "Ren," I said. She looked at the counter. "I need a second." "I'm serious, 1 second. Just," she breathed in, breathed out. "That's a long second," I said. "I know, I'm using it." She looked up and there was something in her face that I didn't see often. Ren was loud in the best way. She had opinions about everything from the best route through downtown traffic to whether a specific shade of blue was actually blue or was quietly green. She made friends with strangers at coffee shops. She laughed at her own jokes before she finished telling them. But this was different. This was her without the noise. Just her. I cleared my throat. "When did you change it?" She pressed her lips together. "Last March. That was 7 months ago." She nodded without me saying it out loud. I counted backwards without meaning to. Last March was when she'd helped me move a desk from my old apartment into my new one on the 3rd floor, and we'd gotten it stuck in the stairwell for 45 minutes, and she'd laughed so hard she had to sit down on the landing. Last March was when we'd done that drive up to Whistler for a weekend because her friend had a condo they weren't using and the roads were still clear. Last March was before any of this had a name. Why? I asked. She exhaled. It's a long answer. We've got time. She looked toward the balcony door. The light had shifted a little. Still gold, but lower now. You remember when your lease renewal came through in March? She asked. Yeah, and you told me on the phone when you were walking home and I was making dinner and you were relieved but also kind of stressed. Because the rent was going up, right? And you said you were fine, and then you went quiet in the way you go quiet when you're not fine. I didn't know I had a quiet like that. Everyone who knows you have a quiet like that. I didn't say anything, and I was standing in my kitchen, she said, and I remember putting down the spatula and just listening. You were describing the new numbers, what you'd have to shift around, whether it still made sense to stay in that neighborhood given the commute, and I was doing the math with you in my head without even thinking about it. Like it was just something I did. She paused, and when we hung up I thought, I care about this person's rent. Which sounds completely ridiculous when I say it out loud. It doesn't sound ridiculous, it sounds very ridiculous. I care about this person's lease renewal. I was stressed about your rent, she said, and then she laughed, but it came out a little uneven. Like a song starting in the wrong key. I called my sister and told her I was losing my mind, and she said I wasn't losing my mind, and then she told me to change your contact name. So every time I worried about you being okay I'd have to see it and maybe deal with it at some point. And you've been seeing it for 7 months. She looked at me directly for the first time in several minutes. Yes, and you haven't dealt with it. I've been dealing with it slowly. The room felt different. Not bigger or smaller, just more aware of itself somehow. Outside, a crow landed on the balcony railing and then immediately reconsidered and left. The fairy lights were still half tangled on the floor. Her phone was still face down on the counter. What does the rest of it mean? I asked. I meant the maybe more than that part. I thought she knew what I was asking. She did. She pulled at a loose thread on her sleeve. It means what it sounds like. I know what it sounds like. I want to know what you meant. I meant she stopped. Started again. I meant that you're already the person I call first. For everything. When something is funny, and when something is terrible, and when I can't make a decision, and when I've already made the decision, but I want someone else to confirm it wasn't wrong. And I've been doing that for 4 years without thinking about it, because it just felt like the shape of things. But then the rent thing happened, and I realized I wasn't just calling you because we were friends. She said the last word like it was a question she'd been meaning to ask someone for a long time. I was calling you, she said, because somewhere in the last 4 years you became. She pressed her mouth together. Didn't finish it. Maybe more than that, I said. She closed her eyes briefly. I hate you. No, you don't know. She opened her eyes. I don't. Neither of us moved. The light outside was going orange at the edges now, that specific late October color that only lasts about 11 minutes before it's gone. Her plant by the window was doing fine, which was partly my doing because she always forgot to water it on weeks when she was busy, and she'd given me a key specifically, so I could come by and water it when she traveled for work. That had seemed like a practical arrangement at the time. Now I wasn't sure practical was the right word for any of this. I should have said something reassuring. I could feel myself reaching for the safe version of this conversation, the one where I made a joke and she laughed and we agreed it was just a funny thing that happened and moved on to hanging the lights before we lost the last of the afternoon. Instead I said, I looked you up on my benefits. Ren blinked. What? When I switched jobs in the spring. My new benefits package had a dependent option. Not just for spouses or kids, but for anyone you listed as your emergency contact. I read the whole form, and I sat there for a really long time trying to figure out why I was thinking about whether you'd qualify. She stared at me. I didn't do anything with it, I said. I just noticed that I thought about it, and then I didn't let myself think about why I thought about it. She was quiet for a moment. That's possibly the least romantic way anyone has ever almost said something to me. I know benefits package. I'm aware. She looked at me, and then she laughed. Actually laughed, the real one with the weight in it, the one where she has to breathe a little before it comes out. It lasted about 4 seconds, and then it settled into a smile and she shook her head slowly. I've been worried for 7 months that you'd find that name and things would get weird, she said. I'm not finding it weird. You're finding it something. Yeah, I'm finding it something. She leaned against the counter and crossed her arms, but loosely. Not guarded, just thinking. You've been weird since the spring, she said. Not bad weird, just different. A little more careful. I didn't realize it showed. I noticed things about you. I know. So? I looked around her apartment. She had a print on the wall above the couch that she'd bought at a market in Gastown the first fall we knew each other. She had a small ceramic dish on the entry table, where she kept the Charlie card she'd brought back from a work trip to Boston 3 years ago and never returned. I had been in this apartment so many times that I knew which floorboard by the kitchen creaked and which cabinet didn't close all the way unless you lifted the door slightly while pushing it. I had been showing up here for 4 years, like it was just a place I went. Like I hadn't been making a home out of someone else's apartment without realizing I was doing it. I used your name as the person to call in case of emergency, I said. On my health forms when I started the new job. On the building contact sheet when I moved. On all of it. And every time I wrote it down, I told myself it was just practical. Because you live close. Because you'd actually answer. Because you know where things are. She was very still. But I think I've been lying to myself for about 4 years about what practical means. Ren didn't say anything right away. That was unusual. Ren almost always said something right away. The silence stretched out long enough that I started to wonder if I'd read everything wrong and was about to have a very different conversation. Then she said, "You put me as your emergency contact." "Yes, before I told you about the contact name." "Yes," she breathed out through her nose. Okay, I'm processing. Take your time." She stood up straight and walked over to the window, looked out at the balcony. The crow was back on the railing. She watched it for a second. "Leave a comment if you think we were both just afraid of the same thing at the same time," she said. And then she turned around and looked at me. "I'm saying that before I say anything else because I think that's actually what happened. That is actually what happened. I know it is." She folded her arms again, tighter this time, then immediately unfolded them like she'd caught herself. "We've been doing this thing for 4 years, she said. "And I didn't name it because naming it meant risking it. And you didn't name it because naming it meant admitting I'd already made a decision without knowing I'd made it." She looked at me carefully. "When did you figure that out?" "Maybe 5 minutes ago." She laughed again, smaller this time. "That's not a lot of runway. I work better under pressure." She shook her head, smiling now, but her eyes were doing something careful. Not closed off, just checking. Like she wanted to see whether I was going to walk this back. I wasn't. I took a step toward her. Not fast, not sudden, just closed the space a little. She didn't move. "I'm not going to pretend this is something small," I said. "I know what this means. It means everything changes, or it means we both admit it already did and we're just catching up to it. And I don't know which one is more true." She considered that. "Both," she said. "Yeah." The crow left the balcony railing. The light outside was almost gone now, just the last thin line of orange above the roofline across the street. Her apartment was getting dim, and neither of us had turned on a lamp. "You wrote maybe," I said. She looked at me. "I wrote emergency contact first. I know. The maybe was added separately. I know that too." She looked down at her hands. It was an honest word. "I know," I said. "That's why I'm asking about it." She was quiet for another moment. Then she said, "It's still maybe because I didn't know if you felt it too." "Past tense." I looked at her. "What about present tense?" She met my eyes. "Present tense is different." "How different?" She reached out and put her hand on my arm. Not dramatically. Just a hand on an arm, the way you'd touch someone you'd been comfortable with for years. Except this wasn't that. Or it was that, plus something that had been waiting underneath all of it for longer than either of us had admitted. I leaned forward and she didn't pull back. The kiss was not a big moment the way movies make big moments. It was quiet and careful and warm, the way things are when you've known someone long enough that you're not trying to impress them anymore. You're just finally saying the thing. She pulled back a little, looked at me. One corner of her mouth moved. "Benefits package," she said. "I know, that's what cracked it open for you." In fairness, I also looked into dependent transit passes. She covered her face with one hand. "You cannot be serious. I was doing research." "You were absolutely not doing research. I was being thorough." She dropped her hand and laughed, the full one, and the apartment felt warmer somehow. We still hadn't turned on any lights. We hung the fairy lights eventually. Got them up wrong the first time and had to redo the corner section. Ren held the string while I fixed the tension, and at some point she started describing a podcast she'd been listening to about a disputed land claim in northern BC. And I asked questions, and she answered them. And it was exactly like 100 other times. We'd stood next to each other doing something ordinary, except it wasn't, and we both knew it wasn't, and neither of us tried to pretend otherwise. Around 8 we ordered butter chickens from the place on Commercial Drive we'd been going to since the second year we knew each other. We ate it on her couch with the fairy lights on, and her lease paperwork spread across the coffee table, because her own renewal was coming up, and she'd been meaning to read through it for a week. I read the relevant sections out loud, and flagged the clause about subletting which she'd missed. "You're reading my lease," she said. "I'm flagging the important parts." She looked at me. "And this feels normal to you?" I looked back at her. Yeah, I said, it really does. She smiled, looked at the papers, then at the lights, then at me again. Her phone buzzed on the arm of the couch. She picked it up, glanced at the notification, then tilted the screen toward me without saying anything. There it was again. My message. And above it, my contact name. Emergency contact, and also maybe more than that. I looked at her. Still haven't changed it. She set the phone face up on the cushion between us. Not face down, just there. I was thinking maybe I'd take out the maybe, she said. Whenever you're ready. She nodded, leaned her head against my shoulder and went back to looking at the fairy lights, strung unevenly along the balcony railing. The corner section still slightly crooked, because we'd never gone back to fix it. I think they look okay, she said. They look a little crooked. They look like we hung them ourselves. That's the same thing. She shook her head. She was smiling, I could tell because of the way her shoulder moved. No, she said, it's not.